Welcome to this video with Caroline Nettle, who is a healer who's here to talk about the painful truth about sexual abuse. Caroline, a very interesting and difficult subject. Why is it you want to talk about this?
Well, there are many reasons that I would like to bring this video to the world. One of them is that I was sitting in meditation 2 days ago, and I asked what would be the best and most useful video that I could do, and I got told this categorically. So I listened, and here we are doing it. But also because since the Me Too movement and so many different news articles about sexual abuse, we can look specifically at the church, we can look at, Hollywood and all the movie stars. There's so many different aspects of this coming to light, so it's very much less taboo than it used to be. But also in my healing work, it is so obvious to me that so many people have suffered from this, specifically women. It's unfair to say that it only happens to women, but a vast majority of people that are sexually abused are usually women. And sexual abuse can be so much more than just rape or penetration. It can be, being touched up. I know I was walking along in an airport in a business suit and somebody groped me. I have been pushed into a cupboard by a boss. This is all sexual abuse. But obviously what we're talking about here is trauma related to having had your sexual boundaries transgressed when you were a small child.
That's an interesting point, because as you were talking about being a woman in a business suit, I wondered how common it is for not celebrities who do make the limelight, but common it is amongst the average population. And also, I would normally, when I look at the news, I think of people who have been abused, as we've seen the church with its child abuse, but then there's the adult abuse as well. So how common is it for both?
Well, I know certainly when you and I were growing up, it was something that was probably as prevalent as it is today, but it just wasn't talked about in the same way at all. If you look at the organised institutions of orphanages and, religion and boarding schools, it's coming to light now that there was an awful lot of harm done to children by predatory teachers and priests. And, that was kind of just something that wasn't talked about. If you take the case of someone like Jimmy Savile, he was notorious for introducing famous people to orphanages, and lots of horrendous abuse took place. My answer to your question would have to be that it is extremely prevalent in adults. A lot of the really harmful, it's harmful whenever it happens to you, but I think when it happens to you as a child, it is just totally devastating on many, many levels, which is a little bit why I wanted to talk to this video. But certainly I would like to tell a story. So I was watching a lady doing a TED talk, and she said she walked into a room and she said to everybody, okay, I'm just going to ask you one question, and your answer to it is either you get up and you go to the left or you get up and you go to the right. So I want anybody in the last 24 hours who's had to think about their sexual security, I want you to go to the left. And anybody in the last 24 hours who hasn't in any way thought about their own sense of safety or security regarding, sexuality would go to the right. And she said every single boy stood up and went to the right. Every single girl stood up and went to the left. And I think a lot of this is to do with the patriarchy and the patriarchal society that we live in, and the constant and utter sort of detriment of the female psyche in regards to our worth, and literally we have to be beautiful, we have to be young, we have to be amazing mothers, we have to be fantastic in the bedroom, we have to, because we've been duped into thinking that we are nothing if we're not the most beautiful or the most amazing woman wife or whatever. So I think there's a lot to do with the patriarchal society, which has robbed us of our self-worth. I think that's fair. And I'm not a screaming feminist, but I am someone who receives into my treatment rooms quite a lot of really, really damaged people who have been systematically, broken by either... Usually, now this is what's interesting to me about sexual abuse. It is very, very rare, quite rare, for you to be abused by someone you don't know. It's more common and very, very common, and I'm afraid I don't have the statistics, but I imagine they're very high, for you to be abused by someone you know, or a primary caregiver, or someone in responsibility, in authority, so a teacher, a priest, whatever we have. So, what I see when these wonderful people look to me for healing is someone in front of me who's so confused about who they are. And, I think one of the most amazing aspects of this particular condition, so sexual abuse, is that it really destroys your entire sense of self, and leads to many, many difficult behaviours in adult life, which tend to lead someone to thinking they're a bit crazy often because they don't know how to be.
It's interesting you say that, because being, shall I say, of a certain age with grey hair now, when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s and working in the 80s, there was very much a culture of, well, what do you expect? You're an attractive woman in the workplace. Boys will be boys, men will be men, just deal with it. And what I find interesting now with the Me Too movement is people saying, actually, that may have been historical, but it is not acceptable anymore.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that gives me hope.
Well, I think that's why actually it makes it, do you think it's making it easier for people to now step up and say, I haven't spoken about this before because I was of that age when it was just considered, well, that's what happens in life, put up with it. But now actually it is acceptable to say, that happened to me and I feel damaged, and I would like to see someone like yourself, Caroline, to start exploring how to heal this.
Absolutely. And yes, I've definitely noticed. See, one of the big issues with something as damaging as sexual abuse is that very often the mind will forget or protect us from the horror of the attack or the consistent attacking. And so there's quite a lot of people, myself, I was included in this number, who didn't know that that was my problem. I knew my life was desperately awful in most areas, and I knew it was to do with me, and I just thought I was crazy, and I was too much, or I wasn't enough, I was too needy, or I was anti-dependent. I mean, I was black and white at the same time, and that can be a little bit crazy making. But for my own journey, and the reason why I feel that I can talk about this is because I've been through this unraveling, and luckily I've had some amazing people in my life to help me on this journey. But we've unraveled it to a point now that I've been able to process a lot of the pain that I was carrying due to facts that had happened in my childhood.
It's interesting. You've answered part of my question already, but my next thought was, how does it affect people? How do you come to the realization yourself? And you've just answered that. But what kind of, I suppose, personality traits might someone display when they've been abused, but they haven't brought that to the surface? There are behavioral issues that they're exhibiting that would lead someone to, perhaps a family member, to think, why is my family member behaving like this? And actually the truth is because they haven't spoken about the abuse. Yes,
and that's a really good question. So one of the most obvious, and I say obvious because it's obvious to everybody else, symptoms for someone that's harboring a lot of pain and perhaps don't know that that's what they're harboring, is addictions. And by addictions, I can mean behavior or substance or people, addiction to men or women or control or cleaning. There are so many different kinds of addictions, but nearly all of them are, I don't like the way I feel, and I'm going to use this behavior or this substance or this person to make me feel better. And addictive behaviors are really common amongst people that have been abused, both physically and sexually. That's fair. But it's a really good way of getting out of your head, as it were. I mean, quite literally, I don't feel the same. I feel better about myself instantaneously. And then, of course, that needs more and more and more because you don't get the fix, etc. So another really common characteristic of someone that's been sexually abused is a complete and utter lack of self. So by that I mean lack of self-worth, lack of self-care, lack of real identity for who they are and why they're here. And I put that down to sexual abuse being such a complete and utter transgression, if you like, of boundaries, a real spiritual disharmony within the lifetime of the child or young teenager or even adult. But it's something that so totally wrecks the person that you are, your wholeness, your feeling of safety, your feeling of trust, all of those things, because our sexual body, everybody has a sexual body, of course, but it's a very complicated and complex subject, which, in an ideal world, all children are safe and secure and grow up into really loving, kind people, compassionate, and they make the world a better, in an ideal world. But unfortunately, when you have been broken in this way, and I'm only using that word because that was what I thought was wrong with me. I'm so broken, I can't possibly heal, I'll never be able to love anyone because I don't love myself. But when you feel that way and you suffer very often from depression, anxiety, rage, these are all really common symptoms of someone who's harboring so much pain. But because you've been spiritually attacked in such an intimate and awful way, it really does feel like as an adult that the world doesn't make any sense because you don't trust probably the gender that attacked you. You certainly don't trust the opposite gender because they didn't help you. People in authority scare you. I mean, there's just it's such a complicated and really loaded field. But I think that let's go back to the lack of self-worth. So I had a really interesting example of someone who had no boundaries. She had met me for less than 10 seconds, and she was already telling me about some dreadful thing that had happened to her. And this is outside of the healing. She hadn't come to me for healing. I met her in the street. And I stopped this lady and I said to her, look, you don't know that I'm safe. You have no idea who you're, telling your most intimate secrets to. You need to do it in a safe, therapeutic place where you can heal from this. But some people, that's a really good example of having no boundaries. Some people just think that if I tell enough people, eventually I'll get the attention that I need, or I'll find the right. But really, that's a very unsafe behavior. Mm-hmm. I really had to stop her, and she didn't understand at all what I was saying by the word safe person. But I'm pretty sure she would have gone on and told lots of other people. And unfortunately, that's where you have victim and perpetrator, because, yes, it sort of leads from there. But
because you draw people in. So if she were, for example, to have engaged with what she needed and come to someone like yourself to start exploring how to heal, how are you able to help people?
Okay, so the best answer that I can give to that question is I can sit with anybody and they can have any amount of pain and I can sit with it and allow them to express that. So I think that's my biggest gift. And I always say that your biggest pain is your best gift. So I can just sit in witness of someone who is going through this. So I do completely understand what was happening. How does BodyTalk work? Well, I'm a BodyTalk practitioner, and whereas in a talking therapy you might sit down for sort of however long you sit down for, and you talk and you talk and you talk, I'm not sure that really addresses the problem. I'm sure there are some fantastic counsellors out there. I know I've sat with a few, but as far as something where you are so spiritually wounded in that it happened at a very early age, or at an age before you had words, or at an age where you weren't able to express it, or you were called a liar. That's another really harming thing that happens to a child. They tell someone and then they say, oh, don't be so silly, it's Uncle Fred and he's fine, you know. So that happens. A lot of people that come to me have that, where they told someone and it wasn't safe and they got into more trouble. So that's a really sad indictment, I think, of our society. But anyway, so with BodyTalk, what we do is we go into the body-mind complex, and so I've heard all the behaviors and the opinions and the belief systems that are coming out of this person, and then I say, thank you very much, I'm going to park that to one side, and what I do is talk to the body-mind complex. So for example, Erica, you know that you have a healing within you that you have no control over, but is always trying to help you. By that I mean, if you breathe something in that you're allergic to, you immediately sneeze. If you're really, really cold, you put clothes on. If you're hungry, you eat food. This is all your body telling you and giving you feedback about how you're doing and you know what's going on in your environment. So we speak to that healing innate wisdom, we call it, and we say to what is troubling this body-mind complex the most. And what happens is, very often, this can be so traumatic that their brain has locked it away. And I thank the Lord that we have a system in our brain that protects us from trauma, because I think sometimes otherwise it might send us mad. So I go back into active memories. We can have unconscious memories. We just go wherever the body mind tells us that the blockage has become. Now, if I had 10 people in the room with the same story, I wouldn't have a single session that was anything like each other, because despite the fact that we're manifesting symptoms, you are a recording device, if you like, for everything that's ever happened to you, and quite often some of the things that you've inherited from mother and father as well. So I'm asking this body-mind complex, what is energetically blocking you, this person that I'm working with, from health, happiness and harmony? And very often, for example, if we are, let's say you were 4 when it happened and you're verbal, but you're not that verbal. And quite often one of the things that happens to children that are really sensitive is it happens to them and then they shut down completely. So they stop talking, or they talk less, or they go in their room a lot more. So they've basically shut down and stopped being that happy, healthy child. So a lot of belief systems get formed around that time, like it must have been my fault. I'm not even going to go into the belief systems, but you can imagine a lot of them are very scared, angry children trying to make sense of what's going on around them. So oftentimes what we'll do is we'll go in and just erase some of the belief systems that were made at the time of the incident. And it's very different if it was just one time than if it was, consistently over, say, 10 years. There's a very different approach to those. But essentially what we're doing is trying to unlock the emotional trauma without having this person needing to process it. So I think that's the real gift of BodyTalk. We go in there, we find out what that young mind decided, and often that's not what you and I as adults probably would have decided, but we have to take it that that's how that individual decided that this was what was happening. Some people go into denial, some people go into anger, some people go into sorrow. I mean, it really is very different for everybody. And then we just do some light tapping on the head and the heart. So we're asking the body-mind complex to reprogram itself. Sometimes, for example, when I'm dealing with people face-to-face instead of remotely, because I do most of my work remotely these days, but if I have a client in front of me, sometimes I'll be asking the body what it wants to do, and it'll say, I've come to some trauma, but don't tell her or him. And it's like, okay, and that's usually because the conscious mind of this body-mind complex that I'm working on possibly couldn't deal with what I'm saying or what I'm feeding back to them. So sometimes we can just come across the trauma or some awful event and just remove it without telling the client what it is. And the reason for that is because the brain is still trying to protect the person from the emotional pain, I suppose. So one of the most often questions I get is, how many sessions do I need? And it's like, how long is a piece of string? It depends how long you've been carrying it, how many belief systems you've parked on top of it, how you're living your life today, how deeply you were wounded by it. It's so many variables. But I usually just say to people, start off with 4, and then we can at least get into some of the deeper stuff, and work through some of the stuff. But as you know, being a healer yourself, Erica, sometimes we have to peel off the outer layer of the onion and then the next layer of the onion, and it can take some time. And then for other people, it just goes in a heartbeat. And I can't tell you why. It must be something to do with being ready to release it, or I really don't know why that is the case. But I want to say, if you are listening to this and I'm going to explain how I was before I got into treatment and I got sober, and I came on this lesson to really heal my life and learn to love myself. And I'm so grateful for that in so many ways. But if you're listening to this and you're feeling like you're completely crazy because you're black and white at the same time, I totally understand that. But you're too much or you're too little, you want to go out all the time or you don't want to go out at all, you're really intimate or you're really distant, like all of these things, that's very, very symptomatic of someone that's had their boundaries completely trampled on. If you are someone who is stuck in depression or stuck in anxiety and just honestly don't know why, sometimes this is to do with parents and learning it from them, but sometimes it's to do with something which is a deeper trauma, then I strongly recommend that you at least visit the website and look and see what I've done. Because when I've worked with people with sexual abuse, I've often found that one of the greatest gifts of what I do and working with people is once they've got rid of the trauma and released all of that, and like I said, it can take a few months to work with them, but these beautiful people emerge who have been hidden for maybe 40, 50 years. I mean, really, truly, it can really affect you adversely for a long time. But to me, even helping one person to shine in the way that they do when they've released all that pain and trauma is such a blessing.
So, Caroline, it's been really insightful and useful sitting listening to you describing this. And I would say, if you're listening to this with myself and Caroline and it has affected you and you think you would like to get some help to explore healing, Caroline, how would we get in touch?
Okay, so I'll put a link under the video, but my website is spiritualgrowthtools.co.uk. So that's .co.uk. So spiritualgrowthtools.co.uk. And what I think, because this is such a huge subject, if you would like to get in touch with me and have a 10-15 minute chat, I'd be more than happy to do that. Get in touch with me via the website.
Thank you, Caroline. You have been listening to Caroline Nettle of Spiritual Growth Tools talking to Erica Longden.